Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video where we're going to talk a little bit today about how to scope and write for wood shake roofs. These are becoming more and more uncommon as they're being kind of replaced by other materials these days, although you will still run across wood shake roofs or wood shingled roofs. Again, not as common. Some neighborhoods still require that. I've seen that. So just keep in mind that they're still out there and they are a specialty type roof, and we have to have some special training on those regarding how we're going to scope those and how we're going to document these. So check with your manager on wood shake and wood shingle roofs about how they want you to do this. For instance, there may be different hail thresholds within your test square that will allow you to replace the directional slopes. For instance, with AFIX, it is 8 hits or more on composition shingles per test square to replace those directional slopes. But with wood shake, it is very different. It depends on the state, the type of wood shake, and the repair difficulty factor. There are several factors that go in, and there is a chart that gives you the hail thresholds, but it could vary between, say, 10 to 22 hits per square on wood shake before you can replace those directional slopes. Now that's AFIX. Again, check with your manager on how they want to handle that, and if there are any specialty requirements on hail thresholds, or if you need approval, for instance, to replace a wood shake roof, which again applies to AFIX. Even if you have enough hits to meet those special test square thresholds, you still have to have authorization to replace the roof or the slope. So again, just check with your manager on the carrier guidelines. So typically you're going to see wood shake or wood shingles. A little bit different. We'll see this a little further down, but shakes are typically hand split, or they look like they're hand split. So they'll be rough on the top. If you'll see this contour in this profile, it shows this rough top side of the contour. That is a wood shake. This is a wood shingle or taper sawn, typically, that's tapered into the end, and it will be typically flat or sawn. Typically, you're going to see medium wood shakes is the most common. You will see heavy shakes, different line item in Xactimate. Obviously, this is more expensive. We pay more for this. This gives the thickness. Anytime you are doing your ladder shots on the ladder, layers, that type of stuff, always perpendicularly clip your tape measure on the bottom of the shingle and then show us a photo of the measurement of the thickness so that you can justify and verify which type of shake shingle is installed on that structure. Okay? We're not going to go in and read all of this. We're going to talk about a few of the pictures and some of the more important areas. Again, you can see that wood shakes usually for 2 to 3 years in that area. Depends on the climate, of course, and where it's installed, what direction the slopes are, but it's nice and pretty and golden, and then it will tend to gray out over time. This is something, space decking is very, very important that you always have to deal with on wood shake roofs, and that's space decking. Typically, as you can see, wood shake is installed on spaced decking. There's some type of spacing between the decking. The decking could have some type of furring strips. It could be, you'll find all kinds of decking out there. It could be 1x12s, 1x6s, a mixture of all kinds of lumber, but typically it's going to have some kind of spacing in it like this. And you'll see why if you have, for instance, composition shingles installed over wood shake. This is why it's so important that you always have to look if you have comp over wood. Now, if you have just a wood shake shingle, you don't have to really deal with the decking too much as far as replacing any kind of decking, unless it's damaged, of course, by a tree impact, something like that, that would be covered under the policy. But you always want to go underneath the house in the attic if you can and take some photos, 1 or 2 photos. Just show what kind of decking is underneath there. If you can't get up in the attic, maybe it's in a small opening in a closet, or it's dangerous to walk up there, fine. See if you can at least reach up there and stick your hand up there with your flash on the camera, snap a couple of shots, look at it real quick, and just see if you can get some kind of shots like this so that we can see what the space decking looks like. That is particularly critical, that we need a shot or two of that if you have composition over wood, which is not uncommon. And maybe you're replacing that roof or the slope. It's got hail damage on it or wind. It meets thresholds. You're replacing it. It's composition. And you've looked at your layer shots. You've taken a photo. And you've documented that there's wood shake underneath that composition shingle. We're going to have to pull all of that off down to the decking. Replace only the top layer, the composition layer. But you cannot install composition shingles on spaced decking. And here is why. Because the nails are going to go right through the shingle and they're not going to go into any decking. So what do we do on this? We're going to pay, typically you're going to pay to redeck the entire roof with sheet decking. Usually it's going to be some form of plywood, OSB, or CDX. Again, check with your manager and the carrier of what they want you to use, but we are going to have to redeck that house or that slope, whatever we're replacing. Again, that's only if you have composition shingles on the top layer and we have wood shake underneath, and the wood shake is installed on space decking. That's why, again, it's so critical when you have comp over wood, you must get inside the attic, or at least stick your hand up there, or in some way try to get a shot that we can identify that it's space decking. And if it is, then you can probably go ahead and write that decking on the whole house or whatever you're replacing. Very, very important. Again, if you can't get up there for some reason, there's no access, and you just cannot get a shot to see what kind of decking is underneath that, then you cannot probably pay for the decking. Now, if it's space decking, believe me, the insured is going to get paid for it. When the contractor pulls all this off, they'll take photos. It'll be paid on the backside through a supplement. However, you want to try to get up there and take a shot, because you want to include that decking in your estimate if you can, for a couple of reasons. One is we want to pay the insured up front if we can, so that they don't have to go through a supplemental process if possible. And two, it's going to add quite a bit of money to the estimate, which means it's going to probably increase your invoice. You can make more money as the independent adjuster. So let's see if we can get up under there, take that picture. If it is space decking, we can rewrite or write for new decking. Again, double check with your manager on that, but typically we're going to be able to write for decking so that we can get the insured paid up front for that. So let's go down a little further and look at some conditions. So you're going to see this very commonly, this type of stuff: curling, edge rot. Good examples of edge rots, weather splits. We're going to talk about this a little bit when we're dealing with hail, particularly because weather splitting to the uninitiated can sometimes look like hail splits. But these are very common conditions you're going to see on older, more deteriorated wood roofs. Now, this particular document, check with your manager. They should have a document like this. I'm looking at directly one of our job aids. This is from an AFIX job aid. If you don't have that, check with your manager. See if they can get with the AFIX managers, or they may have their own wood shake job aids like this. You probably want to get a copy of this and keep it with all your other documentation that you can refer to. So typically, as we know, hail is generally going to be directional. That's not always the case. Sometimes hail is falling straight down out of the sky. There's not a lot of wind, but generally it's going to be pretty directional. It's going to do more damage to the slopes facing the direction of the wind, and typically a little less on the slopes facing away from the direction of the storm and the wind. This is some examples of some wind damage to roofing that you'll see for wood shake. It's typically going to blow some of the shake off. Very common to see the ridge caps blown off. If you can see some fresh wood underneath, that's indicators that it is going to be fresh damage. That's something you always want to look at. If you see some shake blown off, some ridge cap blown off, and you see underneath that it's just weathered, it's the same color and shape, or not shape, but the same color and condition as the surrounding shingles that have also been exposed to the elements, you may want to question that age of that damage. It may not be that current. If you have a current cause or a date of loss on your claim that is like, say, a week old, and you see that it's the same color and it's weathered, but yeah, you may want to question that a little bit. Do a little more investigation. Now, if you have a cause of loss and it's 3 months old, okay, well, that probably coincides. You probably don't have to ask as many questions. It's been out weathering a little bit, you know. Just something to think about. Now let's look at some of this stuff on hail. What we're looking for when we're scoping for hail that we can count as damage in our test squares is split wood, fresh split wood. We're looking for splits in the shake. So a lot of times hail's going to hit wood shake and maybe not split it. It's going to mar it. But we don't consider that typically in the adjusting industry damage to the shake. It still can shed water. It's not physically damaging the shake in the degree that it cannot perform its function anymore. However, a split in the wood like this, yes, now it can't perform its function. Water can get down under and inside the split, under the shakes, and potentially penetrate the house. So this is what we're looking for. Fresh wood in the split with hail impacts on or near the split. This is a great example right here of good hail damage on the shake, on or near the split, and the adjuster is splitting the shake apart a little bit, showing us this nice fresh blonde wood color. That's obviously a recent split in that shake. Another good example here. Got a pretty good hail hit, pretty large hail. Split that wood. We can see that fresh blonde in here. That's what we're looking for. Fresh splits, that nice golden blonde color. Good examples here of hail damage to wood shake. Typically, it depends on the carrier and how they want it documented on the roof with your chalk, but typically they're going to want you to put parallel lines down along the actual splits and then circle the hail hit. So the hail hit may not be right on the split. It needs to be close, at least on the same shake, and close to that or on the split. But they usually want you to put parallel lines to show here's the split, the actual split, and circle the actual hail hit. Or if you got a couple, 2 or 3, circle those 2 or 3. That's fine. Here's a good example of hail impacts to shake, or see, this is shingles right here. Remember, it's pretty flat here, where we do not have splits. It's not physical damage. This is cosmetic hail spatter. You'll see this very common. Now, you're obviously looking for splits, but if you don't see any, and it's not splitting that wood, and it's not fresh wood, no damage. You cannot write that. You're going to document it, take a photograph of this stuff, show that this condition is on the roof, certainly. Footfall, very common. You may break some shakes or shingles. Maybe the contractor does. You can count that, although be careful. Don't be walking on shake in a way that's going to just continually split the shake and damage it. Be very careful how you're walking on shake. If you do, go ahead and document that. With your chalk, put an FF on each side, footfall on the shingle, take a picture of it, split it apart, show that it is a fresh split. You can include that. Now, let me clear something up there. Let's go back. Typically, you cannot include this in your test squares. So let's say you've got your threshold is 12 and you have 9 hail splits that are good hail splits, and you've got 3 footfalls, that does not mean you can include those footfalls and kick you up into the over your or at your threshold and buy those directional slopes. The reason why is because footfalls are individual breaks. Because remember, your test square is a test, it's a sample. If you've got 12 hits or 12 splits, and this is on comp too, that test is saying I'm going to have an average of 12 hits or splits per square across the entire slope. That's not going to be the case with footfall. Footfall is an individual breaking or marring of a shingle or a shake like this by walking on it. That is not happening every test square, every square across that slope. Well, you can include those if you are not meeting thresholds and you're doing repairs to roofs. Then you can obviously include those footfalls. If you are footfalling within a test square and your threshold is 12 to right the slopes, and you've already got 13 hits, you don't really even need to document any footfall. You're already meeting the criteria for replacing those slopes. It's just usually if you're under thresholds and then you have some footfall, yeah, go ahead and document those, and we can include some additional shakes in there for footfall. Repair versus replace. We're not going to read all this, but this is going to be driven generally by the guidelines of the carrier. So that could vary a little bit. You're going to want to talk to your manager about how they want to handle replacing versus repairing. That's usually going to be dealing with what the thresholds are for hail, and if there's any specialty requirements, like with AFIX, even if you're meeting thresholds and there's plenty of damage that warrants replacement of the roof, in your opinion, you still have to get approval from the carrier or management to replace that roof or those slopes. So again, check with your manager on that. That can vary again by how they want to handle wind damage to wood shake roofs. So again, check with your manager on that about what the carrier's guidelines are and any special requirements on how they want you to handle repairing versus replacing. With some, they're going to have, for instance, hail, they may need more thresholds. For instance, with AFIX, you have to have more than 75% of the roof meeting thresholds before you can replace the entire roof. An example of what's different in that is with AFIX on composition roofs, you only need to be over 50% on composition meeting thresholds. Then you can stop and you can buy the entire roof. With wood shake, it's 75. And with wind, it's going to be higher anyway, typically. But again, this goes under what I just mentioned. Check with your manager on all of these different thresholds and requirements and guidelines of how the carrier wants you to handle specialty roofs, including wood shake. This is just giving a little bit of examples of some F9 notes. You may want to take a look at of how we might write repairs in Xactimate replacing. For wind, we don't conduct test squares. Typically, wind is going to be dealt with in scoping per facet. Each facet stands on its own. We're counting all the damage of the wood shakes, ridge caps. We're adding all that up. If it's older, you may be able to go ahead and replace those slopes or those facets depending on how much damage there is and the age and condition of the roof. Again, all of this will be driven by other parameters or metrics laid down by the carrier in their guidelines. Check with your manager on this so you're well aware of what those are, so you know how to scope that when you're in the field, how to diagram that document that property, photograph it, and how to write it in your estimating software. So I hope that makes some sense. Again, we're not going to spend too much time on this. The main thing is to understand what we're looking for with particularly hail damage. Wind is a little bit more obvious of when we have wind damage, but hail is a little trickier. One thing before we end, I wanted to go over about the weather splitting versus actual hail splitting. So one thing you may want to keep in mind is you'll see a lot of this weather splitting on older wood shake roofs. You'll see it everywhere. Very, very common. The weather splitting may go all the way up the shake underneath the exposure. It may be starting, and it may be only an inch or two or three up the shake. As you can see, some of these, it's in all different kinds of sizes and shapes and in different stages of deterioration. But one thing you want to look for is on weather splits, there's some telltale signs that it's a weather split. One is, as you notice here, is it's already pretty wide split. There's gaps. A hail hit that's hitting and splitting a fresh split on a good shingle is typically going to be a solid piece of wood that hail hits and splits that wood. So that means if you put the shingle back together, it's going to be a super small little line that goes up that shake. And if you split it across or split it apart with your hand, it's already split. But if you spread it apart, you'll see that fresh wood. You put it back together, and it's going to piece right back together. It's going to be sometimes almost imperceptible. But it's going to be a very, very tiny, thin, defined split. It's not going to have any large openings in it. Weathering is just that. Weather splits, meaning that split has been caused over time by weathering, not by hail impacts. We don't pay for this, but you're going to see it, very common. Another telltale sign is, like I just said, if you were to look at the profile, if you were to get your camera down or you were to get your head down and look on the surface of this, shake up the surface, typically you will see a drop in a weather split right down into the split. You'll see a drop. If you'll watch my cursor here, you'll see a drop down in. It'll bend down in with a curve and then back up on the other side of the split. Kind of a little bit of a curved V. And the reason why is the sheer corner of the weathering, the sheer amount of time it's been in the weathering causes that corner of the split to start weathering down into a curve. Again, on a hail impact, it's going to be a 90-degree basically, because we have a piece of wood that's intact. Hail falls down on it and hits it, and it splits it instantly. Now we've got a nice clean split all the way through that shake, and the corners at the top of the shingle are going to be basically sharp angles. So any of those curvatures is indicating weather splitting. Another thing you'll look at is if the weather splitting has gone all the way through the shingle, because that's what's happening. So a lot of these you can't split apart. It's weather splitting, like some of this looks like that's probably the case. And it hasn't split through the shingle yet. And if you try to split this apart, it won't split. Be careful. Don't force it and break the shingle. But put a little light pressure, a finger and a thumb on the top and the bottom on each side of a split, and give it a little bit of pressure. If it's not moving, it's still intact. But you can see it's a weather split. It hadn't gone all the way through. But sometimes it has gone all the way through, and you can split it apart. And what do you think you're going to see inside that split, on the inside, the interior of that split? You're going to see gray, old, weathered wood. Remember when we split and spread out the shake to see what's inside on a good hail hit that split it, we're going to see that fresh, blonde, new wood. But we're not going to see that on weather splits. So just keep that in mind. Those are some things to look at when you're scoping for hail. If you have any more questions, as always, talk to your manager, your claim supervisor, and they'll be more than happy to help you on this kind of stuff and give you assistance and support. Hope you have a great day, and we will see you on the next training video.